And welcome, everybody. Prophecy in the Spotlight here. I'm your host, Brother Dan Goodwin. As I said, Doc is not with us today. I've got a special guest here in the studio. Brother Michael Samuel Smith is with us today from Arlington, Texas.
That's correct, Arlington, Texas.
Brother Mike, we go way back. We go back to, what, 2018?
Yes, sir.
Something like that, or
Yep,
was it before that? When did you first hear of me?
On TV, actually on the internet. In 2016, 2017, I first contacted you in 2017.
Okay, so right. That's kind of where the beginnings of it.
That's correct.
Did I think you were some kind of a nut? Do you remember?
It might be.
Are you some kind of a nut?
Well, the shell is still here. So.
The old saying is, I may be a nut, but I'm screwed onto the right bolt. That's right. What matters.
That's right.
And no, I'm sure I didn't think that. You always, every time I've talked to you, you just get bombarded with numbers and things and facts and did you know, Brother Goodwin, that stuff that you just, because you have a whole different area than I have, just like Doc. Doc has an area of expertise that's outside of my circle. I have an area that Doc is not into, and we do very well together. And you too. You have a circle, a sphere, so to speak, of stuff that you have studied and you understand that is outside of my realm a little bit. And of course, numbers are mind-boggling for me, and I like numbers, but it takes me longer to get them.
Yes.
And for instance, after 6 days in Matthew 17, I've got that one.
Yes.
And in fact, I found that one. I don't know if you had ever saw it, but I found that one day. And after 6 days, and I called a friend of mine. I said, "Hey, look at this! How about after 6,000 years, he takes Peter, James, and John up, and the two witnesses come down, and the tribulation begins." And pretty awesome right there. So I do understand numbers, and I believe in numbers.
Yes.
I just don't comprehend it all.
None of us comprehend all of it.
All right. Now, you've got a DVD that we're going to talk about today, and also in another program later. And but first, let's explain to the audience, in case they don't know you, and I'm sure some of our audience hasn't met you. You and I met on the internet. We went back and forth. We probably even talked on the phone at some time. But when I was asked to go to Prophecy in the News and host Prophecy News, which I did for 2 years, I think 2018 to 2020, something like that.
Right.
And then we started this one when their program ended. We came and started our own. You, I believe, was the first guy I called, you and Dr. Hiltebittel.
That's correct.
I believe you may have been my first guest.
That's correct.
And we talked about the Cyrus effect. The Cyrus effect.
Correct.
And that was, of course, Donald Trump on the scene and all that. Right. Interesting. And we've done many since then, the Red Heifer, Joseph, and we've done quite a few, many of them while I was still there. Yeah. So tell them a little bit about the personal side of Michael Samuel Smith. Tell our audience a little bit about your background, military and airplanes, a little bit about your background, and then how you got into prophecy.
Well, Brother Goodwin, most people that are into prophecy come from a theological background. I do not. I come from an aeronautical background. I was a pilot for 50 years and 9 months, starting 1965 to 2016. I was a commercial pilot out of high school, and I joined the Army at 18 years old, and I went to fixed-wing flight school in the Army and became a warrant officer pilot, 19 years old. I went to intelligence school after that, Fort Huachuca, Arizona.
Did that help?
Yeah.
I can't help.
Wasn't
I couldn't
very
help
intelligent.
It.
That's how I got the job. Probably.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just couldn't resist.
But anyway, I went to Vietnam after that. I served 2 tours in Vietnam. I flew surveillance aircraft, signal intelligence airplanes, twin-engine turboprops airplane, the Beechcraft.
Were you guys in any danger at the altitude that you guys flew at in Vietnam?
Yes. Well, everybody was in danger, just being on the ground in Vietnam, actually. Yeah. But anyway, the Lord took good care of me. My 3rd tour over there, I served 2 tours till the war ended. I finished my second tour when the war ended there. I stayed another year and a half, and I flew the Searching for Missing in Action teams into Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam until December '74, and then I came back home.
Did you guys find anybody?
The teams did. They found bones of people. They paid the locals in those countries, and I flew the teams to a large airport near there. Of course, this is before the communists took over Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. And so that's kind of how that went. And then I came back after that. I married Mrs. Wonderful, my wife Tanya. My wife of over 47 years now. Then I continued in the Army. I continued to fly fixed-wing, rotary-wing aircraft. I was an instructor pilot. I was an instrument examiner as well. In other words, I could give instrument check rides to people. So anyway, I served in different capacities in flying, completed a 20-year career of flying there. I was very fortunate to get a job with American Airlines. The next day after I retired, I just changed uniforms. And so anyway, I spent 1 year flight engineer on the gigantic DC-10 aircraft. The following year, I became a co-pilot on the DC-9, McDonnell Douglas DC-9 or Super 80. I served 8 years as a co-pilot and 17 years, my last 17 years at American Airlines as a captain, and then I retired in 2016.
Okay, so how did you get into prophecy?
I was, the Lord really called, I know this is a little far out, the Lord called me into this the 13th of September, 1975.
Way back.
And I started about a year later, September, October 1976, I started teaching prophecy. And I taught it, I was in the military for many years after that as well. And the countries that we were in, at military chapels, my wife and I, we had fellowship programs, and I brought in preachers to teach, other than the standard military chaplains. And I had to work very closely with the chaplains. I had a good relationship with them. I did prison ministry 6 months in Germany. I also did prison ministry 3 years in Korea as well. And I've been guest speaking about probably 45, 46 years as well.
You've been to Israel, you've done videos in Israel, things like that.
Right. We did 8 documentary films in Israel in 2014.
And you have a YouTube channel. My wife,
yes,
she'll put that up, but what is it? It's Michael Samuel Smith.
Right. You go to Michael Samuel Smith, then you click on subscribe, then you click on uploads, and all of our films are there. In fact, many of our interviews together in Prophecy in the News are on there as well.
Okay. All right. So they can go there. There's lots to see there.
Yes.
And exciting stuff. So today, and we'll do a second show on this as well, we're going to talk about something brand new that is not on your YouTube channel yet. And we have, in fact, I think we're the only people that have this at the moment.
Up to now, that's correct.
And we have this. It's called Real Forgiveness. But it's not just about forgiveness. This has got prophecy in it, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. Along with this, I am adding my biblical forgiveness book that I wrote. When did I write this? Way back. 2005 I wrote this, but it's just as applicable today as it ever was. And I give what I believe is the true biblical teaching of what forgiveness really is. Yes. Now, on your DVD, you give examples of people who find forgiveness. I give the biblical understanding of what forgiveness is. And let me just read a couple of things here. I give the definition of forgiveness. I talk about Ephesians chapter 4. Be kind one to another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. But does that mean we forgive unconditionally? No. Colossians 3:13, forbearing one another, forgiving one another. If any man have a quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also do you. But is there something required to get that forgiveness? I have often said one of the biggest hindrances to Bible study is faulty teaching from our past, and this is certainly true concerning forgiveness. I do not believe that we are to forgive one another unconditionally. I believe that forgiveness must be earned by the person who has done the wrong. By the way, Brother Smith, we do that with our kids. When our kids do wrong, we don't take them to buy them an ice cream and pat them on the back and say, "Oh, I love you anyway, son, don't worry about it. No, there's got to be a period of correction there, chastisement. Yes. Hebrews 4 talks about that if you don't suffer chastening, you're illegitimate. You're not really God's son. And that's true with us as families, too. We sometimes, man, I've cried before, trying to get a child to see something, and it can be painful on both ends. But forgiveness, proper forgiveness is important, because if we don't forgive biblically, then we hinder the process of restoration, because forgiveness is all about restoring the relationship that was once there. Right. And for a father and a son to have a relationship, if the son does something that wrongs the father, that's got to be made right. Or there's a problem there. There's always going to be a problem there. Right. Well, that's the same way with God. Yes. If I have sinned against God, as a Christian, now I'm talking about as a Christian, and all Christians sin. If anybody that thinks they don't sin, then they're not reading the same Bible I'm reading. Right. And we all mess up. But God made a way for man to get restoration as a Christian and be restored back to fellowship with God. Yes. And you don't get saved again. You get restored to fellowship. And that's very plain in the Bible. And 1 John 1:9, that's written to Christians, not lost people. If we confess our sins, He is faithful and just to forgive our sin. You see, there's a condition there. And I know you know this, and you read the book. And let me just read one verse that's very, very interesting here, very thought-provoking. This is in Luke chapter 17, verse 3 and 4. If thy brother trespass against thee, rebuke him. And if he repent, forgive him. Now I want to ask the audience, have you ever heard a preacher stand up in the pulpit and say, if your brother trespasses against thee, rebuke him? You don't hear anybody talking like that. What do you hear? Preachers will tell two guys in the church that are maybe having a squabble. He'll bring them in the office and he'll say, "Now we're all Christians here. Now shake hands and forgive each other and get out of my office." And Brother Smith, that is very, very harmful to a relationship, because what just happened is the guy who had been wronged, because one of them two guys is usually in the right and there's a squabble. When he brings them in and tells them to forgive each other and get out of the office, he's just wronged somebody a second time. The guy who got wronged just got wronged a second time. And what's going to happen is he's going to get bitter. Mm-hmm. And that's very sad. So if thy brother trespass against thee, rebuke him, go to him and tell him his fault, and start the process of making that right. That's what this book is about here. And I believe it'll be a good complement to Brother Smith's DVD here on forgiveness. So let's get into this, and we'll get into more of this in the next time we have you on. We'll probably stagger these every other week or something. We're going to do a couple of shows with you. So let's start at the beginning here, Brother Smith. First of all, why did you what was your purpose in this DVD? Well, that's a very good question. What our teaching covers are actual stories about the concept of forgiveness in the Bible. As an example, in some of these stories, there may be numbers in there that are actually showing prophecy. Yep. And by the way, there's a number of these forgiveness stories that are in our film here that actually, it's about Israel and their relationship with God, past, present, and future. And I think that's very important. So anyway, we wanted to create a film where we talk about the prophecy behind the story. This could be shown in a Sunday school class. It could be shown even in a church service or a personal Bible study. And we had all that in mind as we it's 57 minutes. I mean, that would fit in many church services, but if they needed to shorten it, they could skip a couple little things and make it work. Right. It'd be a great tool to help people see some of these things about forgiveness. Right. So let's look at the first illustration. You have the first instance of forgiveness in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Is Adam and Eve. Yes. Tell them a little bit about that. Well, we're in chapter 2 and 3 of the book of Genesis, obviously. We know that Adam and Eve have sinned. We're well familiar with that. When you get into Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, Adam and Eve had made aprons of fig leaves to cover themselves
and they were embarrassed, obviously. And God is asking them where they were. He knew where they were, obviously, and what was going on. But God had a plan. In other words, there's a concept that's coming about in this story, and that is we get into Genesis chapter 3, verse 21. The Lord, and I do believe it's the Lord Jesus Christ pre-incarnate.
Sure.
That's my personal opinion. He takes these animals and he kills them. In other words, there's the shedding of blood, right? Shedding of blood takes place. And he covers them with coats of skins. Okay, so this is not going to do away with their sin, but this is going to cover their sin. Now, there's a couple concepts going on. One is later in the law, we will find in Leviticus chapter 17, verse 11, and it says, it is the blood that maketh an atonement for sin, right? Also in Hebrews 9 and 22, it tells us without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sin. So that's a concept. I do believe that Adam and Eve later, now Cain and Abel will not be born until after they leave the garden. But I do believe they passed that information. There's a good chance they passed that information on to them.
And of course, we were going to ask you that. Adam and Eve have children,
right?
But this is after the garden. They're not in the garden now.
They're not there. That's correct.
And here's something. And I shared this with you yesterday. I think at dinner. Had Adam and Eve had children before they sinned, then when Adam and Eve sinned, their children would have still been sinless, and that would have really been interesting because sin is passed on through the father. But if they were already born, then the children would not have been sinners. Adam and Eve would have been dealt with, and things might have turned out different.
You're right about that.
But Romans 5:12, for by one man sin entered in the world. Notice it didn't say by one woman. I'm not saying Eve didn't sin. Eve sinned, and she was accountable. I understand that. But the sin nature is passed on by the man through the bloodline.
That's correct.
And the bloodline goes from the man to the baby in the womb. And so good stuff, brother. And now there's a second thing in the Bible. Was there anything else on Adam andEve you wanted to say? Or
no, I think we covered the thing on Adam and Eve.
All right, you did say, and let me have you expound on something, because somebody out there heard you say that the blood that was shed for Adam and Eve was not enough. Explain the rest of that so they understand what you mean by that.
Well, excellent question, by the way. I personally believe Adam and Eve, now the Lord did cover them, okay? It didn't do away with sin. But when they physically died, they went to Abraham's bosom, down to Abraham's bosom.
We call that paradise.
Paradise. And they were there 4,000 years until Jesus dies on the cross. And that's where the righteous that are in, and only righteous by the blood, where the righteous go back to heaven on the Feast of First Fruit. You call it Resurrection Sunday here in America. That's actually the Feast of First Fruits, which is, it just so happens that's the first Sunday after Passover, right?
Right.
Okay, so it's actually the first fruits going to heaven from Abraham's bosom, and there won't be an Abraham's bosom anymore. So people go to heaven or hell after Jesus died on the cross.
Yeah.
He goes back to heaven.
And it doesn't mean they had to get saved again. They were trusting, Adam and Eve were trusting in the Messiah that would one day come and shed his blood.
I believe they did.
But they couldn't go to heaven yet because the Old Testament specifically says, in the flesh can no man see God.
Correct.
So you have to have that born-again, regenerated spirit in order to be in the presence of God, and that's why there's a paradise. I have a whole chapter on this, and she probably doesn't have this available, so we won't get it on the screen. But my book called The Mystery of the Jubilee.
Yes.
There's a chapter in there called The Mystery of Paradise. It's actually the largest chapter in the book. Mm-hmm. And I have a whole chapter where I explain paradise, Abraham's bosom. Mm-hmm. I give all the scriptures for that, why they were there, why they went to paradise and not heaven. See, the thief on the cross, Jesus said, today shalt thou be with me in paradise.
Right.
Now, it wasn't talking about heaven.
Yeah,
He was talking about where Abraham's bosom was.
3 days later. On
David
the third
was
day, he
there.
goes up.
All the Old Testament saints, as we call them.
Yes.
What's an Old Testament saint? A believer in the coming Messiah is a saint, just like you and I are believers in the Messiah that came.
Yeah, same
It's
concept.
no different.
Right.
The difference was he hadn't shed his blood yet. The blood's not on the mercy seat yet, so you couldn't physically you couldn't enter heaven yet because the blood's not there yet.
Yes.
And I like how this goes. The rabbit trails, whatever you want to call them.
Okay.
And so let's go to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
The next thing in the video, you go to their offspring, Cain and Abel. 2 boys are born outside of the garden because they've been kicked out of the garden. They're now sinners.
Right.
And tell us a little bit about the forgiveness of in the story of Cain and Abel.
Okay. Actually, what ends up happening is Cain. There's a sacrifice that's going on. Okay, there's sacrifices with Cain and Abel, and
what are these what's the purpose of these sacrifices in
I guess they
your
feel
opinion?
like they're going through the motions of honoring God, although Abel was sincere about it. Not the case with Cain. So and by the way, we are in chapter 4.
Genesis 4.
Some people call chapter 4 the first murder in the Bible chapter, which technically that's correct, but there's a lot more going on. And so I think what's happening here is Cain did not have the right attitude. In other words, he had an attitude problem. Okay, and that was one of the reasons why the Lord did not accept his.
So in other words, they both brought an offering or sacrifice before God. Abel brought animal sacrifice, blood, if I recall.
Correct.
Cain brought the fruit of his garden.
Vegetables.
Okay, so go from there.
Well, there's a lot of Sunday school teachers and preachers that preach, well, the reason God did not accept Cain's offering was because it wasn't a blood offering. Not so. And I say that in the sense that later under the law, there are grain offerings, okay?
Right.
But the problem with Cain is he has a bad attitude with God, and he has a bad attitude with his brother, because later, in chapter 4, he kills his brother. Obviously, there's a problem there.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. Now, and so maybe we'll get a chance to talk about a sign later.
So Abel is going to be the first person in paradise. Am I accurate there?
Well, it could be Adam and Eve. We don't really know. I think. I mean, that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Well, I think Adam and Eve are still there. I don't think this is that far down the road, but.
Well, Eve, we don't know. Right. Adam is 930 years. He will live.
He will live. Right. So it's possible. Right. We'd have to go and do some study. Good thing to go study right there.
That's correct.
My understanding has always been that that Adam and Eve are still there, but I could be wrong. About that. I'm not sure the ages of Cain and Abel are given in the story, so when this happened. And we don't know how quickly they had children, but anyway. So where's the forgiveness aspect of this Cain and Abel story?
Well, I think the part is to really get into it. We have to study the story about Cain. Okay, we have to talk about a sign. Is this a good time to talk about a sign?
Sure.
Okay, let's talk about a sign. I want to go back to the sacrifices. My personal belief is that God had showed a sign whether or not he rejected or accepted their offerings. Okay? And my personal opinion is, in fact, I gave in the film, I gave 6 different scriptures about how the fire came down from God
and burnt up
totally
a sacrifice.
Consumed the sacrifice. And I believe that's what happened with Abel. Now, I'm going to share 4 very, very quickly, okay? One is Moses and Aaron, Leviticus chapter 9, verse 24. Samson's parents. We see that in Judges chapter 13, verse 20. Elijah, 1 Kings chapter 18,
That's the one we remember the most. The fire burnt up everything. Yep.
Right, and Solomon, the story with Solomon, 2 Chronicles 7 and 1.
And
okay,
your understanding of that, what does that mean to you? What the fire eating up the sacrifice?
It means that God has accepted it. Okay, it didn't happen with Cain. And again, the reason it didn't happen was his attitude. It wasn't so much being vegetables, it was his attitude, not only his bad attitude towards his brother, but his relationship with God. And I do believe later that God is basically going to be dealing with Cain.
So if someone believes differently, believes that it's because it wasn't a blood sacrifice, it doesn't change the understanding of the fire showing God accepting it. That was your main point there.
Right.
Was
that's an opinion.
The fire didn't burn up Cain's sacrifice. God didn't accept it. Regardless of why, it doesn't change what you're trying to get across here.
Right. True.
And so good stuff. We got about 2 minutes, Brother Mike. Let me just ask you a couple things. There's a phrase in there, God comes to Cain and ask him, where is your brother?
Right.
And because I think his blood has come before me, or he knew he was dead.
Chapter 4.
And Cain made a statement that has been used for several thousand years. Am I my brother's keeper? What does that mean to you?
Well, that shows his attitude about that, and the lack of his attitude. Now, I do think that now God could have took Cain out for murdering his brother. He did not do that. I think there was a reason why he allowed him to live longer, but there's a whole other story behind this with Cain, and I know we're kind of short on time here, but let me say this. Cain has a son by the name of Enoch. It means trained obedience, basically, or trained, if you will, in Hebrew. It's a godly name. There's another different Enoch in chapter 5. Not to be confused with the same one,
right,
but it's a godly name.
Yeah.
And then what happens is there are 4 sons that Enoch has, his son. And by the way, the first city in the Bible is named Enoch after his first son. Right. And 2 of the 4 sons of Enoch, which are grandsons of Cain, have Hebrew names with El on them. I believe we're seeing something in there about that.
Okay, and maybe we'll touch on that in the next show. We're out of time here, folks. Thanks for watching. Thank you, Brother Smith, for stopping by, and we'll be doing some more shows with you, folks. Hope you enjoyed the program. Get the DVD, get the book. Until next time, keep your eyes on them skies.